Call the meeting to order for the Policy Committee of the Whole for today, Tuesday, July 9, 2024. Ms. Cindy, have roll call.
Ms. Richards, Mr. Toller, Ms. Abrams, Mr. Westmoreland,
Present.
Mr. Duncan, Mr. Anthony,
Here.
Mr. Moore,
Here.
Mr. Piazza,
Here.
Ms. Dominguez.
Present.
The record reflect that we do have a quorum today. First item is adoption. Consider approval to adopt policy JGCF, behavioral health support for students. Good afternoon, Mr. Jinko.
Good afternoon, board. How are y'all today?
Good. How are you?
Doing great. This is a new policy that's being brought forth to us from forethought that is related to Act 324 of the recent legislative session, and talks about after a second suspension of a student during the same school year, principal or designee shall consult on whether the individual, the students, if the behavior is due to an academic issue or behavioral issue. This fits very nicely into our SAT team. So again, we bring this to you for your consideration and adoption.
Do I hear a motion to adopt?
I'll make a motion to accept.
Motion by Ms. Rose,
Second.
second by Mr. Trent. Any discussion?
Yes. Okay. Mr. Dinko, if you would, what is the, why are we, what is the need or the necessity to adopt this into our policy? Is this something that has been established in the law that has to be adopted?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
This one of the amendments that passed this session
Just
in the
legislative section,
legislature.
Act 324, yes, sir.
Okay. So my problem with it is that it doesn't really, we haven't really, it doesn't seem as though we've given it any forethought as to how we're going to actually apply this, how we're going to implement it. It also seems, it appears to leave a lot of room for what I'm afraid would be selective or misguided. In other words, the application is not identified, it's not explained well enough. I mean, just as a policy, it's broad.
The good thing with this is that you've heard about kids that are falling through the cracks. So it may be a student that, for whatever reason, was not put up to the student assistance team to find out why he or she was having the behaviors that they were having. Well, this will prevent that, because after the second time, hopefully we catch these children before they are have two referrals. But after that second referral, he or she has to go through this process. So that is going to be to me the saving grace of this policy, is that all these students that we know are going to have these issues are going to have the attention they need from that student assistance team to try to find out, is the issue an academic issue or is it a behavior issue, and then try to dig down and find out how we can get some supports to make sure those behaviors are taken care of, whether it's academic issues or a behavior issue by the student.
Isn't also the Department of Education's very, they want to find out what the numbers are.
Yes,
of what's
there's
going
got
on
to
with
be
these
some
children
reporting
that has
with
these
this.
mandatory reportings. Anytime every July you got to have the total years
Correct.
numbers into this, so they can study, that they may be able to
Adjust
allot
the
some
pop-
resources depending on what these studies find.
Correct.
And Mr. Jinko, I did have one question as well. After reading it, there's two things that kind of stood out, and I just want to make sure we're clear if we're going to adopt it in policy. I know that it's forethought and it has to be done, but is this after every suspension? So if it's like a minor, I don't know, something minor that happens on campus, this is the second time, and the administration says, hey, we want to suspend the kid for 2 days. Does that automatically trigger this, and do we have enough members on our SAT team to address for that? Because I think that's going to really gum up the wheels if it's every second suspension.
But it's the way it reads is after the second suspension. So if I'm suspended twice, when I return, I will go through this process.
So any
Hopefully.
suspension.
Hopefully, if I am a troubled child, whether I can't sit still in class or whatever, that maybe we can take care of these issues before I get that second suspension, and that maybe within the first 6 weeks, you being the astute teacher that you are, would send me through the process to begin.
Because that's my only concern here is that, I think the overall idea of the lawmakers and what this is put in place, I think is a great idea. I just don't want it to be where it gums up the wheels and then it's one of those things we have in policy that, is really unrealistic to how we do things. So that's why I was asking that second suspension, is that the law part or is it?
No, so that's the
So
law
that's the
part.
law part. It
Yes,
has
sir.
no choice.
And this is, as this is the first year of doing this, we may see if it is a school or a section of the parish that has a large number of these, maybe we need to address it and have a pupil appraisal team that would go assist during those particular times and try to develop two SAT teams to go through
And that's
the
what,
process.
and that's kind of what I was hitting at is like, hey, if the board need to address that with, with employees to say, hey, look, we know it's going to be a big deal at maybe these certain schools that have 1,200, 2,200 kids. We need to make sure that we have a separate maybe SAT team or, I just don't want it to become one of those policies that we put in place that doesn't get actually done because we don't have the employees to do it or the resources to do it, because I think this actually would save a lot of us headaches when it comes to the DRC, and because that's the ultimate goal, is to catch the kids before they get to that point.
Myself and someone was just talking, we want the DRC to be the Maytag repairman, the loneliest people in the world.
That's
That's our
right.
ultimate goal.
That's right.
Mr.
Go ahead.
So your second paragraph, it says a specific employee shall be designated at each school. So have we identified how we're going to do that?
Our thoughts with that is for our elementary schools, that's going to be our elementary counselors that have a little more knowledge related to the related services.
Okay.
And at our high schools, that can be our guidance counselor or one of our special education individuals or the pupil appraisal team member that is on that learning community.
Okay.
So yes, ma'am.
You have a plan already?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, and so, Mr. Jinko, those are the kind of details that I would like to see in here, because, I've gone over and I visited with, some of the children that have been remanded to the alternative site. And these kids aren't crazy, they've got emotional issues because of environmental conditions, domestic conditions, there are things that are out of place. But the last thing I would consider them being is crazy, because they're really quite intelligent. Most of the kids that I've talked to are able to explain things in a way that you would never hear from a crazy person, right? Someone who has mental issues. I've not talked to one who had mental issues because in a discussion with them, they're able to settle down and actually discuss with me, some of the issues that they're having. I don't want to see us get to the point where we equate mental and emotional. You see what I'm getting? I see it as I see this as a tool that can be helpful, but I also see it as a tool that can be used to label.
I think the purpose of the tool is that student you were talking about, if this would have been intact last year, maybe after their second issue, he or she would have been through and got the resources he or she needed, whether that was extra counseling or to see someone to prevent them from getting to the point where they had to go to the DRC. That's our ultimate goal in this.
Okay. Call for the question, Mr. Firstborn.
But can we also, isn't that also the reason for our social emotional learning curriculum to try and address these things with children so that they get an understanding, so that we don't have to wonder whether or not the child has a mental.
Oh, yes, yes, and again, this is just not for mental issues. It could be academic issues. I could be acting out in my math class because I have trouble with the math problems. I could be acting out in my language arts class because I can't read. So hopefully we can find those types of issues with the student, send them through the SAT team to find out, is it an emotional issue, a behavioral issue, or an academic issue, and address it so that he or she can be in that classroom.
Okay, so those won't be mental issues though, right? Those will be
All these types of issues can go through this SAT team, and then they will find out why is Ron having troubles at school? Is it social emotional? Is it academic? Is it behavioral? And then address them.
Mr. Jinko, last question, I promise. On the second part of that paragraph, it says that if it is determined that the child does show some type of emotional thing that the designee has pinpointed, that they will have a counseling session with the family. Is that assessment going to play any role in future disciplinary action? So let's say little Jimmy gets in trouble for X, Y, and Z, and we find out it's because of a situation at home, but little Jimmy continues to go through discipline. Is this record going to be presented to the DRC that, hey, we provided the family with this solution, the family did not follow up on that solution, so therefore us as a school system, recommend X, Y, and Z because we don't have the tools to help little Jimmy. We presented them with the options they have, they didn't address it, and now we're still going down that same path. Is that going to be in play here?
I know that is a hypothetical situation, but I think if we find out that little Ron or little Jimmy needs these services, then we need to do everything we can to make sure that he or she gets them, whether that is with an outside agency or with an inside agency, having them come into the school. And then there will be certain things that the DRC could see, and if there were any of these meetings that were held, I would imagine some of that information we would not be privy to.
Because the reason why I say it's a very vague second paragraph. If that's the case, I wish that would be in there. Is, hey, we are going to do everything in our power to give them this, but it's up to the family to do this.
As you've sat in some of those DRCs, when those conversations begin, that type of information, parents kind of, hey, we had this, we could not make it to the counselor, we could not do this,
Right.
and then we try to come up with another plan for them.
Okay.
Question's been called for. Ask members to vote their devices.
Voting is open.
Yes, Ms. Cindy.
Voting is closed. Motion passes with Mr. Moore voting no.
Moving to revisions 2A, consider approval to recode policy JGCFA, behavioral health services for students. Mr. Jinko?
Yes, sir. This is a policy that we already have on the books, and they are just recoding it to JGCFA. The policy that was previously passed will replace it at JGCF.
All right, now a motion.
Motion to adopt.
Motion by Mr. Piazza,
Second.
second by Ms. Rose. Call for the question.
Voting is open.
Yes, Ms. Cindy. I lost my connection.
Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
All right, moving to B, consider approval of the revisions to JCAA due process. Mr. Jinko?
Thank you, sir. As our experts were going through some of our policies and so forth, they found that in our due process policy, they wanted a more legal definition of what due process was. So that's what we offer you tonight.
So
add to
all
it.
you added was what the United States Constitution says?
Yes, sir.
All right, do I hear a motion to adopt?
I'll make a motion to.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Rose, second by Mr. Joey. Any discussion? Call for a vote.
Voting is open.
Yes, for me.
Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Moving to our last item, consider approval of the revisions to policy GBRIB, sick leave. Mr. McNeely.
All right, let me tell you the story of this. As you know, we're taking over substitute teachers from ESS this year. And so as we were discussing some of the problems that we have trying to find subs, part of it is if someone calls in the morning of saying, I can't come in, or they log in and do it. And if that person was someone who really wasn't sick, but they were taking an early holiday or whatever, it's just kind of a game that creates problems. So instead of trying to figure out all of those things, Ms. Stilley and the executive team said, well, why don't we make it more flexible for employees to use sick leave? So the first change you see on line 2 used to read because of personal illness, and we added the word personal reasons. So someone can take off and use sick leave for personal reasons, whether that's a rest day, whether that's a spa day, whatever it is. We're not getting involved in HIPAA with what your issue is. The rest of it is Mr. John Geis cleaned up our sick leave policy, moved all the definitions in one place, added some definitions. I believe Forethought also added some things. But the major takeaway is one, we're asking the employees, if we give them more flexibility to use their leave, to try to give us more notice when they're going to use the leave so that we can adequately cover those absences. The other thing that this does, if you look in the second paragraph, is we're recommending to give the employees the option, and I emphasize option, this is not something they have to do, but the option at the end of the school year on May 31st, any of the 10 leave days that they got during the year, and this is just for instructional staff, bus drivers, and cafeteria workers. And you say, well, why those 3 categories? That's the 3 that we get substitutes for. Okay? So if they don't use the sick days, they have the option to say, I would like to be paid for those days. Now, what we intended was for them to get paid at the substitute rate. So the substitute rate in our salary schedule for a teacher is $105 a day. For a bus driver, it's $100, and then the cafeteria workers are hourly. But there is actually a state law that John Geis made us aware of that caps it at $75. So the most that we can pay them is $75. Once again, that's at their option. So if at the end of next school year, they do not want those days to roll over in their sick bank, they can cash them out for $75. By the time that's going to happen, we will have a document created that they're going to sign, fully acknowledging, I understand that by doing this, these sick days will not roll over, they will not be available for retirement, those kind of things. So that's the gist of what we've done here. So we want to reward the teachers and instructors to get them in the classroom that choose to cash out. And so if they don't use any of their 10 days, they could get an extra $750. So
Do I hear a motion before we have any discussion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion.
Motion by Trent.
Second.
Yep.
Second by
I do have
Ms.
one quick
Rose.
question.
Go ahead,
May
Mr.
I?
Trent.
Just to avoid any confusion, or before I tell anybody the wrong information, say 2 years in, they haven't missed a day, they have 20 days. Can they cash in those 20 days at the end of school year number 2?
So, no, what they could cash in is the 10 for the current year they didn't use. Once they're banked, they're banked.
Okay, but they'll still have 10 days.
That happens June 30th of each year.
They'll still have the 10 days from year 1
But you can't.
stockpiled.
You can't, they'll have them banked.
Gotcha. But yeah, no monetary
if
value.
during the, so basically if during that year, and this is a little different than yours, but during that year, they took off 5 days, they can only cash in the 5 they didn't use. If they took 3, they can only cash in 7. It has to do with that current 10 days that they got for that school year.
Okay,
Once you bank them, you can't go pay. They're
Right.
banked, you go on to the next year to choose from those.
gotcha. All right, but they wouldn't be able to, all right, again, sorry for my confusion. They had 3 remaining from year 1. So now they have 13 in year 2 and they do not miss a day. They could cash in 10, the other
10.
3 would remain banked.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
And I got
Mr.
a,
McNeely, I have one clarification. I've gotten a couple questions, and I think we might need to add where it says instructional staff. and I think we talked about this as an executive team, but instructional staff, you have instructional coaches, you have, instructional team members, technology. They're not, if they're out, they don't require a substitute.
Right. On the second page.
Okay.
If you scroll down, Mr. Geis
Okay.
added a definition for instructional staff.
Okay, I'm getting
It
there,
says-
Mr. McNeely. There you go.
Instructional staff means those classroom teachers
Yeah.
and paraprofessional who have direct student interaction for the purpose of actual classroom instruction and whose absences result in the employment of substitutes.
All right, thank you. I knew we talked about it, but I wasn't sure if it was included.
And I got one question, Mr. McNeely, just really to make sure it's clear. I know that if we bank it, it becomes a sick day type bank. According to this new definition, is personal reasons going to be able to be used for those as well that are
Yes.
banked? So it doesn't have to be just sick for the ones that are banked? And is that retroactive as well?
Anything that you have banked, you can now use.
Thank you.
The only thing that, that does come into sick leave is under certification of absences. An employee who is absent for 6 or more consecutive days shall be required to present a certificate from a clinician. Okay, so we're still, you can't take off 2 weeks, but you can take off 5 days. And you don't have to submit a note, you don't have to, but we just ask the employees, please give us as much notice, if you can.
There's, just to add, I mean, there's really no tricks here. We're trying to accomplish 2 things. One is as much notice as possible for, they don't have to play like they're sick. Just let us know you're going to be out. We can get a sub lined up a week or so in advance. And then secondly, is just to, teachers or instructional staff that require subs who don't use that can benefit from that monetarily, and their family can. So that's really, I think, all we're trying to accomplish here.
So no more Disney flu the day you're supposed to leave.
No Disney flu.
Dang.
Right.
Just put in a leave request, leave.
Yep. Any other questions? Not, we'll call for the vote.
Voting is open.
Yes.
Voting is closed. Motion passes unanimously.
Nothing else to be brought before the Policy Committee of the Whole. It is adjourned.